Sinclair is going to be under center. Konechny and Myers in the backfield. Hand off to Myers up to the right, and he is loose. Aiden Myers down the sideline into 40, 50 into Panther territory. He's still going. 30, 20, 10. Touchdown Wildcats. No flags. First play from scrimmage for the Wildcats. Aiden Myers on a 91-yard touchdown run.
That's the way we dialed it up. Just like that, one play and we're off the field. Sprick had him around the waist, and that wrestler and Aiden just shook him loose.
Ran right through it.
Yep. He had every chance to make the tackle back there at about the 40, 45, and Aiden was just too much for him.
Stanley County showing some pressure. They rush 4 into the flat, and number 11 steps in. Paxton Deal, and that's going to be a pick 6.
Yeah, that's just a nice way of jumping that route by Deal.
Yeah, Falk looking. I think that was Sandos kind of in that little zero bubble route, and a couple receivers were going downfield, and Ethan thought he could sneak it in there and just was a little late, and Deal all over it, pick 6.
Back to receiver Pirates. Number 1 is Meyer will do a kickoff return for a touchdown.
Guessing they punch this in, and then they're probably going to take off the pads. Oh, Knuth looking at going deep to Feldy, and bingo, bingo, there it is! Touchdown, Tigers!
Number 3, Brayton Feldy. A 33-yard pass play and connection.
33 yards from Knuth to Feldy. Touchdown.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, inside the 605. Once again, our 5th episode as we talk everything South Dakota high school football. That's Jason Andera. I'm David Brown. We actually learned a lot this week because we're getting further and further into the season, but we learned a lot in particular. We'll get to it later, a bit of a teaser, but in particular in 11-man, we learned a lot this past weekend.
Yeah, I think in 11 AA particularly, we still have a lot to learn, but we did learn a lot. And then, a lot of people coming up to me trying to figure out what Spearfish is. Now we're trying to figure out what Watertown and Pierce, and we'll get into that much later. But this is the time of the year when you do figure out a little bit of the path that you're going to get or the path that you need to get to the Dome. We're on the downhill for some of these teams here coming up soon.
Absolutely. Some of these teams already halfway through their seasons, especially in the 9-man classes. A reminder, you can comment anytime during our live show. We are live on YouTube, liveticket.tv, 605 Sports. And you can ask Jandy anything at any time. We'll get to the questions later, but you don't have to wait for your questions. And we have this new elevated wheel of justice. It's the same wheel, it's just higher.
Something different there's the question mark right there. Yeah. Something different every week on Inside the 605, and eventually, we're going to get this show looking pretty good. But we appreciate all of you who have come along for the ride and been here all season long. It really does help to have the community out there. So don't worry. Feel free to ask me a question throughout the night.
Ask a question, request a new host besides myself.
Dude, don't do that.
Either way,
I need it.
Whatever you want, we will try to accommodate as best we can. But we start each week, as we do every week, with some brownie points.
Let's do it.
And for the second week in a row, Mr. Jason Andera, my first brownie point I mean, it has to be Watertown. It is the story in South Dakota high school football this week. The biggest story of the weekend, 28-14 victory over number 1 Pierre. The Governor's first loss to an 11AA team in the regular season since 2021 at Brookings. That's remarkable.
That's quite a run, and it shows just how much we've taken for granted what Pierre's done over the last few seasons. And it was surprising because Pierre came in as a solid number 1. Everybody was voting him number 1, and Watertown comes in and doesn't even play. They didn't play a perfect game to beat Pierre. They had a lot of mistakes, but they created chaos on defense. They created turnovers. It's the first time Caleb Lounsbury threw some interceptions for Pierre. And to me, it's because of what Watertown did defensively, not only putting pressure on the quarterback, but they've got some ball hawks in the defensive backfield.
Yeah, 3 picks for Watertown in that ball game. So I mentioned it's the first AA loss in the regular season for Pierre since 2021. That was at Brookings. Trivia question for you. When was the last time Pierre lost to a AA team at home?
A AA team at home. Was it T area?
It was not. 2018, Harrisburg, who is now in a completely different class and has won a title in a completely different class. It has been 6 years since Pierre has lost to a AA team at home. Again, as to your point earlier, shows how remarkable the Governor's run has been. Now, let's be clear. This is not some sort of declarative statement about a changing of the guard, but Watertown has now firmly cemented itself as the top team in this class.
Well, they have, and look at this. We've got 2 teams that are undefeated, and I'm sure you didn't have this on your bingo card to start the year. Brookings and Spearfish as the last 2 undefeated teams, but it is Watertown still undefeated in the class. That feels like the team to beat right now.
And speaking of all those teams you just mentioned, my second brownie point, let's just talk about 11AA in general. The top 5 are Watertown, Pierre, Spearfish, Yankton, and Brookings. Then you go below that, T area has rebounded since that Spearfish loss, and Aberdeen Central has played a lot of teams close. So among the 11, 12 teams, I can't remember, I think it's 11 teams in AA, we have 7 of them that are legitimately, I don't want to say like frisky, but have legitimate reason for optimism here coming down the stretch. The depth in AA is probably the best it's been in quite some time.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Brookings plays Aberdeen last week. Aberdeen hasn't won a game yet. Brookings undefeated, and they played a 1-point game.
Yep.
And by the way, Bergen Tetzloff, what a game that was for him to score the final 8 points in the last quarter of that game by himself, and he did an unbelievable job defensively. But to that point, T area has done nothing but show up in the last couple of weeks. And now they look like they belong as a contender, even though they lost to Spearfish week 1. Spearfish, like we said, still undefeated. They look so fast out there.
Yep.
I want to see what they do when they play Aberdeen Central this week, which, again, you've got an undefeated team and a team that hasn't won, and it could go either way. It's a coin flip. That shows you how wide open 11AA is right now. And we're not even talking about teams like Yankton, who put their best performance and their best foot forward last week in a huge win over Douglas.
Yeah, Spearfish with a shutout of Mitchell. We'll get into that a little more in 11AA, but also to your point, Aberdeen, they played Pierre close the very first week of the season. So even though some of these teams may be 1-2 or 0-3, the depth in AA is pretty remarkable. Again, we're not necessarily saying that Pierre's run of 7 consecutive championships is over, but there's going to be a lot more competition this year.
It is wide open. Whoever wins it is going to have to earn it and stay healthy here coming down the stretch, that's for sure.
Third and final brownie point, how about Harding County Bison? They win in a game against a class above them for the second straight week, a shootout over Hill City, 50-43. I know Harding County has more than Riley Veal on its team, but you want to talk about legwork? I don't know what else to say other than 52 carries, 423 yards.
Yeah, we'll get to him more, but on a team effort, they were the first team. I mean, Devin Bueller still had a day against Hill City, but not the kind of day that he had in the first few weeks of the season. The Ranchers' defense is very good. And offensively, yes, they put up big numbers. It was back and forth. But the defense, even though they gave up a lot of points to Hill City, they did as good a job as anybody against Devin Bueller this week. So for them to go up a class and get a couple wins like that last couple weeks, I agree. Give them a big shout out, a big brownie point for that one.
Harding County Bison, 2-0 the last couple of weeks against teams in the class above them. So we touched on Riley Veal a little bit, just one of many fantastic individual performances this week, Jandy.
And that's what I like to do, is give a shout out to some of the top performers around the state. And this week, no different, a ton to pick from. I got it down to about 10. And let's start with Major Arstead. First of all, that's a great name.
It is a great name.
Major Arstead.
Almost as good as Jandy.
Just a sophomore. This guy, if you see this dude, he looks put together. He's about 5'8", super stocky, solid. And last week they gave him the football, let him run, 226 yards, 3 touchdowns for Major Arstead in a win for Bonhomme last week. Let's talk about Braylon Boucher of Millbank, another junior quarterback, almost perfect through the air for 288 yards and 4 touchdowns. Also ran one in, and I got to love it when he does it on the defensive side, too, with the pick on that side of the ball, too. Aiden Myers, very close to being my game ball winner. He did everything he possibly could. If you saw before we went on live here, we showed his first play from scrimmage, a 91-yard run to break things open for Kimball Whitelake. Total, 303 yards rushing, 3 touchdowns, and he also got a pick on defense as well. Britton Heckler's quarterback, Jace Ryan. I could have named about 5 guys off this Braves team that had an outstanding week last week. And we had some nominations all the way up and down the lineup. But I'm going to give it to the quarterback, Jace Ryan, for what he did. Threw for 230 yards, 7 touchdown passes.
That's a lot.
Also ran one in. So some really good 9-man and 11A performance in there, too, with Boucher. But a good look there. And let's go to Brody Schaefer now, who is making a habit out of making this list every week as well. Brody basically played a half in the President's Bowl, 16 of 20, 244 yards, 4 touchdowns, and then he also ran for 58 more yards and 2 more touchdowns. This guy's a sophomore, Dave.
He has that pedigree, though, learning from his brother a little bit, but still, for a sophomore, incredibly remarkable.
He has had such a great start to this season. I remember when his brother was a sophomore, he had some interception problems. So far this year, Brody has stayed away from the turnover problems, so great start for him. Caleb Schoenbaum, he is another guy from Burke, a workhorse, 36 carries, 261 yards, and 5 touchdowns. Shout out to the Burke Cougars. Brady Schroedermeyer, how about this? He started out the year not as their starting quarterback, had some arm soreness. Last week showed that he still has a strong arm. 220 yards rushing and 5 touchdowns, and he also threw for 206 yards and another couple of touchdowns. We usually put people on the list who go for 100. He had a 200 game, Dave.
A 200. Shohei Ohtani, 50-50. No, you got a 200 rush, 200 pass game, Brody Schroedermeyer.
Way to go, Brody. Tanner Stein out of Elkton Lake Benton. He's, a couple different guys on this Elkton Lake Benton team that have had tremendous seasons. Well, Tanner Stein, we haven't mentioned on this list, but had a huge week last week. 10 tackles and a tackle for loss on defense, as well as getting 4 touchdowns, rushing, 1 more receiving. So big night for him. And then Riley Veal. This is our guy we talked about. 52 carries. He also had a reception and a completion. So what did we figure out? 70 plays?
70 plays from scrimmage. He was involved in 54 of them, which is 77%.
Riley Veal got it done in a big way. 423 yards. And when you watch the highlights, you see why he's so good. You cannot bring him down with one person. He is rumbling through the defense constantly. He's getting 10 or 15-yard chunks at a time. And defensively, he had a great day as well. Had a couple big tackles. So Riley Veal, we're going to talk a little bit more about him during our Real Deal segment, as Ryan Deal had a chance to do a story on him. Some real interesting stuff coming up. But congrats to the Harding County Bison rancher for a big week.
And so, who is the ultimate game ball winner?
It is Riley Veal.
It is Riley Veal.
It is Riley. If I didn't mention it, yeah, it's Riley Veal. And he's
spoiler alert.
He was unbelievable running the football and catching the ball and getting 2-point conversions and a little bit of everything for Harding County Bison last week.
We'll see if he can legally change his name to Riley Beef, because he does it all for the ranchers. This is why I'm here, for these types of puns and all the expert analysis that you provide. But Riley Veal, your game 1 game ball winner, just for an absolutely dominant performance against Hill City. As you said, the defense for Harding County was good, even in a shootout, 50-43 over Hill City. But you see why this is one of the best players, not just in 9-man, one of the best players in South Dakota high school football, period.
And he's done it for years, and this year he's making his senior year count.
Absolutely. Riley Veal, Harding County Bison. He is your Game 1 game ball winner. Of course, thanks to Game 1 for sponsoring the game ball this year. We'll be right back after a message from our friends at Game 1. Thanks again to our friends at Game One. And let's continue the rhyming, Jandy. It's the real deal with Ryan Deal discussing Riley Veal. And more.
And more. And Aiden Myers and Isaiah Meyer and a couple Myers and some Deals and some Veals. I mean, what more do you want out of a segment? But yeah, Ryan talks about the 11-man game he's looking forward to, the 9-man game he's looking forward to, and the 3 games he saw last week. Here's more from 605 Sports, Ryan Deal.
Time to talk once again to 605 Sports, Ryan Deal. Ryan, you always get out to a lot of games. Last week you were able to get to 2 different games, and I'd like to get your impressions of what you saw not only in Avon, but what you saw at the President's Bowl. You can start with Avon.
Yeah, absolutely. Went to Avon to get an eye on the Pirates. Last year's defending, last year's Class 90 champs played Corsica Stickney, number 1 against number 5. And Avon, they obviously looked the part. Isaiah Myers is as good as there is in our state, especially at the 9-man level at running the ball and just some of the other things he can do. And not just him, Landon Mutter and some of those other guys. Just a fun team to watch. I got to give credit to Corsica Stickney though. Got down early, kind of looked like one of those where we could get out of there a lot sooner than we did. But Corsica Stickney, credit to those guys. Hung around there and played with Avon. So we'll see how it kind of shakes out later in the season with those 2 teams in 9B. But Avon certainly look the part there. And then Saturday went to the President's Bowl. First time going to the President's Bowl. Kind of wanted to get an eye on a couple different teams and everything, and watch the 4 big Sioux Falls schools, I guess you could say, with Lincoln, Roosevelt, Jefferson, and Washington. And that was fun just for my kind of point of view, just seeing some different teams than I traditionally kind of get to. Obviously, my heart's with the 9-man teams in the smaller schools, but always fun to branch out and see some different teams and some players. And it was certainly fun to go to Sioux Falls and see some of those bigger schools and everything.
Yeah, the President's Bowl, some years you come up with some good matchups. These were a little bit more lopsided, but it shows you, the 2 teams that won, they play coming up later this week, and that's going to be interesting to see how those Jefferson and Lincoln challenges against each other.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think when you get to the Sioux Falls and those bigger classes, it's fun to see the kind of the caliber of athlete. It's kind of definitely a step up, I guess you could say, when you kind of compare the 9-man to those bigger Sioux Falls schools. So it's certainly fun for me to see some of those athletes and everything.
Speaking of athletes, a couple of athletes that you're doing profiles with on 605 Sports, Aiden Myers out of Kimball White Lake and Riley Veal out of Harding County Bison. 2 guys that made their name known during the top performer segment for sure. Tell us a little bit more about your interactions with these 2.
Yeah, absolutely. We can start with Aiden. Had a big game against Platte Geddes, went over 300 some yards, and I believe he broke the school career rushing yards record or whatever. And when I talked to him, it was really cool. He's breaking all these records and he's making school history, but he really was really more praising the people around him and praising his offensive line and just the cast of characters around him. So really cool to talk to Aiden and just his approach and just how, he's getting the recognition and the praise, but he's really deflecting it to the people around him. So very cool to hear that from him. And then Riley Veal, similar kind of story. Had a big game, over 400 some yards in a shootout against Hill City, really a back and forth kind of a game, 50 to 43. And, we were talking earlier, Riley carried the ball 52 times in that game. And similar with him, when I talked to him, he was all about the team and just talked about his linemen, really making it happen for him. And Riley's got an interesting story because he lives in Bison, and obviously Harding County and Bison, now they've co-opted the last 4 years, and he actually has to drive about 150 and 160 miles a day just to go to practice and come back home. He lives 20 miles away from Bison, so he puts on a lot of miles, and ironically also puts on a lot of rushing yards throughout the season. So a couple nice kids to talk to, and just very humble and all about the team. So it's always fun talking to those kind of kids.
Great stuff. And those stories, if not already, will be available on 605 Sports. So make sure you check that out. Let's talk about the big games of the week. We do this each week, an 11-man game that you got your eyes on and a 9-man game you have your eyes on. The 11-man game, I mean, it's pretty tough to argue. Last week, these two teams were tied atop 11A in the rankings, now 1 and 2. Yeah, it should be a lot of fun, right?
Absolutely. Canton and Sioux Falls Christian will play this week. And at this point, kind of feels like they've kind of separated themselves a little bit in 11A. So, what better way to kind of settle it, so to say, and see who is the top team right now. And then obviously just going out there and playing. Canton has had their number in recent years. I believe Canton's beat them, five straight times in a row. So I don't know how that'll kind of play out. I don't know if that really matters for this game, obviously, but I think that'll be a fun one just to see, so we can kind of settle who is kind of the top team in 11A.
And in 9-man football, we've seen these two towns, no matter what class they're in, and they seem to jump classes a lot. Canastota and Howard be contenders year in, year out. They face off on Friday.
That's always a fun one. I've been to that game a few different times in the regular season and in the postseason, and it really never disappoints. I think it's one of those, you can kind of throw records out the window. And obviously, in years past, they both have had great records. So it's always a lot at stake in this matchup. A couple Corn Belt teams. Last year, I think it was a 30-18 Canastota win. And the year before, I think Howard won 21-20. So hopefully that's a good indication of what we can anticipate on Friday between those two teams. But yeah, that'll be certainly a fun one to keep an eye on.
Ryan Deal, staying coverage or keeping the coverage up in 605 Sports, and always a good job. Look forward to seeing what you put out next week.
Absolutely. Talk to you later, Jason.
Thanks again to the Real Deal, Ryan Deal, for his chat with you this week. And yeah, that Howard Canastota game is going to be very interesting in more ways than one.
Yeah, exactly. Canastota sounds like they're going to have a new quarterback in that game, Blaze Showers, who used to be part of the Lincoln program and this year transferred in late to Canastota. So a lot of people are going to be talking about that and seeing how that all plays out. And then you've got Howard, who's just Howard. So
right.
And they're a little class above. A 9A versus a 9B. That's always interesting too. But those two have had such great games over the years. I wouldn't be surprised if that one's close as well.
And how about that for a first test as your new quarterback? Number 1 Howard
try
from
that.
A class above. But they are going to Canastota, so
exactly.
Should be very interesting to see. All right. We have the elevated wheel here. We will attempt to give it a spin. The wheel spares no one. Who are we talking about first? Got to look at our side monitor. AAA, look at that.
That's all right.
That's all right.
That's all right.
We'll just go AAA on that. We'll make it simple this week.
All right, we'll make it simple.
All right, AAA. Probably the biggest story of the weekend was just the President's Bowl blowouts. Lincoln over Roosevelt, Jefferson over Washington. I think what this weekend just solidified is that there's a clear top 4 in AAA, and when they play each other eventually, that will sort it out, because the top 4 teams, Harrisburg, Lincoln, Brandon Valley, and Jefferson, they're all 3-0.
Yeah, isn't that strange? They haven't played each other in the first part of the season. And unfortunately for O'Gorman, they've played all of those top teams. They played the top 3 teams. Except for Jefferson. Yeah. So, yes, now we're going to find some stuff out. I think almost every week we're going to have some type of a battle between a couple of those top 4 teams. And it starts out this week with Lincoln against Jefferson. I think Jefferson's better than people think, but it's a huge test in Lincoln. I personally gave my first place vote this week to Lincoln. Just what they've been doing is unparalleled to me. I know Harrisburg's number 1, and they deserve those number 1 votes, but I think Lincoln's the top team. What do you think?
I still kept Harrisburg number 1 just because I'm of the opinion, unless there's something catastrophic that happens to you, you shouldn't fall from at least my own personal number 1 rankings. But I think the thing with Lincoln, which we discussed a little bit earlier, it's not that we doubted him, but I think the overperformance probably of Brody Schaefer at quarterback as a sophomore, just because if we're being honest, we didn't know exactly what Lincoln would have under center, just because they had Tate for so long. You figure Brody would be good. I don't know if anyone expected him to be this good this early in the season. I did. And that's why Lincoln, to me, isn't necessarily, I guess, a surprise, but I think a pleasant story early in this AAA season.
I don't think anybody knew that he would even be the starting quarterback. There was a legitimate three-player battle for starting quarterback at Lincoln this year. And Brody, he won it with that first game against Stevens, absolutely balled out. But the running game has been there. Mikey Roach came up big last week. He's been quiet the first couple games, and then last week made a huge impact in that game and showed people that they still got to worry about Mikey Roach. So congratulations to him. They came in with Devontae Wilson in the second half with the running clock. He had 3 carries for 156 yards and 2 touchdowns in mop-up duty time. So they've got depth. They've got guys who can come in mop-up duty and look really good too. So Lincoln's dangerous at this point.
52 yards a carry. It's a pretty good average.
I'd just retire if I was him. Just be done and go into the Hall of Fame.
And kind of one of the underrated things about Lincoln is, we talk about the offense a lot. That defense has been fantastic. Of course, they're led by a future Jackrabbit, Luke Kremkes.
Yeah, and he gets so much attention. Like, his numbers don't look as good, but yeah, Edison Knoll and some of those linebackers, and they're getting Ruben Dye's getting a lot of attention up front too. But they've had other guys step up and make a lot of plays. So yeah, Lincoln looks really good this year. But Jefferson, that's a really sneaky team. If Ethan Swenson can not throw interceptions in that game, take care of the ball, Davion Simonson and that offensive line can move people around. Jace Unzen's come up really big in the passing game this year, and Eddie Whiting is a true weapon on both sides of the ball for Jefferson. I think he's a future D1 player for sure, just as a junior. But look out for him. He could make a real impact in that game.
That's a 34-14 victory for Jefferson over Washington, and both of the Warriors' touchdowns kind of came in garbage time. This was a 34-0 game. Probably the only other notable result, Brandon over O'Gorman, a top 5 matchup. O'Gorman's 0-3, but as we said, they've played the top 3 teams in these first 3 weeks of the season. Getting shut out against Brandon, again, I think Brandon's a legit number 3. I think Brandon has proven itself on both sides of the ball. With O'Gorman specifically, though, again, you play these top 3 teams, but how do you bounce back knowing the competition you faced and getting better from it?
Well, you nailed it. Knowing the competition you faced and knowing that you have 6 seniors on this team and you don't have a solid number 1 quarterback right now, is you see a couple different guys back there trying to get some stuff done, and Sully Schlimgen taking direct snaps. As they get that figured out, I think they've got some good pieces, and I think they're going to get some momentum here now that they've gotten through the toughest part of their schedule. But I wouldn't count O'Gorman out, but they're definitely a half step behind those top 4 teams, if you ask me.
O'Gorman will certainly be favored this week. They head west to take on Rapid City Central. Brandon Valley is at Roosevelt. That game's on Saturday. Interesting one, a cross-class matchup. Number 1 Harrisburg is going to go down to Yankton and play the Bucks in 11 AA. Well, let's talk about that one before we get to the big game.
Yeah, I think we've got a lot to talk about. I think Yankton's going to find out more about themselves in this game than Harrisburg, but Harrisburg knows they can't take this one lightly. They've got a lot of athletes on both sides of the ball. But last week, Sam Knuth looked really good again, and he's been getting better and better. He put some dimes on the ball right to Braden Feldy, and I don't care who you're playing against. He looked really strong. So we'll see if he can continue that balance between his running game and his passing game. Offensively, I think they should be really good against Yankton. Defensively, they're probably outmatching Yankton in that game, but Yankton has a lot of weapons on the outside that they're going to have to cover.
Yeah, very interesting cross-class matchup there. But the game of the weekend in AAA is going to be Lincoln and Jefferson. One of these teams is going to fall from the ranks of the unbeatens, and now we finally get to see this test. You liked Jefferson coming in, but we've also seen Lincoln maybe outperform expectations early on.
I think both of these teams are probably a little better than I thought even a month ago.
Sure.
And I think it's going to be a huge test for Jefferson, but it's going to take a monumental effort for the Cavaliers to get a W in this game. Just because I love the quarterback play from Brody Schaefer. They're just so consistent and so balanced on that side of the ball, where Jefferson, they've made a few good plays in the passing game, but they're not quite as balanced. And I think the Lincoln defense has a little bit of an advantage over the Jefferson offense so far. But we'll see how that plays out on Friday night.
Absolutely. Howard Wood Field, Lincoln and Jefferson, the big matchup in 11 AAA. All right, we'll move on down to 11 AA. And we talked about it a little bit earlier with Watertown over Pier. Some of the intricacies of this game. A fake punt extended an arrow drive to tie the game at 14. They had a blocked punt in the end zone from Spencer Winchus. We mentioned the 3 interceptions they had. And then late in the fourth quarter, when they were only up 7, they get a big pass play down inside the 5-yard line and then get that touchdown for that final 28-14 victory. These are the kinds of things that separate the good from the great teams. When you can do a blocked punt, when you could hit on an 80-plus yard pass play, those little things add up towards a team's record, obviously, towards its stats, but also their confidence.
For sure. Especially, I can just hear John Hodorf saying, we made too many penalties again. And they did. They buried themselves and shot themselves in the foot time and time again over those first 3 weeks. So they still have more they can do. But I love what Trayton Hemrick has given them as far as confidence. When you're talking about confidence, Spencer Winchus looks like one of the best players in the class on both sides of the ball right now. And overall, their depth on both sides of the ball is so good. So if they can cut down some of those mistakes, I think starting to talk about Watertown as a legitimate favorite in this class. It's hard to peg anybody as the favorite in this class, but they really look like they've got the most upside to do that.
Yeah, think about it. Back-to-back weeks, Yankton and Pierre victories. So hats off again to Watertown. With Pierre, I don't think it's time to push the panic button, but in a weird way, no coach will ever admit a loss is a good thing. But I think for Steve Steele, this gives him something like, okay, we're not the same team that's won 7 championships in a row. There's some things we need to legitimately clean up.
Yeah, and they knew that, but it's different coming in after a loss because now the players, it hits a little bit differently. And I know Steve Steele, and if you know Steve Steele and that coaching staff, they haven't played their best ball yet. We know they're going to continue to improve throughout the year. These kids like to take coaching, so they will learn from this mistake. But they're definitely not the favorites right now in 11AA. At the end of the year, though, don't be surprised if they're right in it.
Absolutely. Spearfish, a shutout victory over Mitchell, 43-0. Yankton all over Douglas, 74-6. So for the 3 and 4 teams, not necessarily business as usual, but good for them in terms of taking care of business.
Yeah, exactly. Taking care of business, and that's what you have to do. If you're Yankton, you got to be really happy doing what they did, scoring over 70 points against Douglas and getting ready for Harrisburg this week, where no harm done. If you don't win this game, you obviously want to get the win, but no harm done, and you can still work on stuff as you prepare for that second half of the schedule. So that was big for them. And then Spearfish, again, taking care of business. I mean, they've done a great job running the football, passing the football. They've got speed all over on all the different positions. This week, I'm really looking forward to see how they match up with Aberdeen Central.
And speaking of Aberdeen Central, that close game against Brookings, you mentioned a little bit earlier, the 8-7 victory from the Bobcats that came late in what was kind of a defensive showdown. But with Brookings, they shut out their first 2 opponents, 30-plus point victories in each game. Now you have a close game, a come-from-behind game. This is a Brookings team that if we're being honest, hasn't really been quite right the past couple seasons. They've struggled a little bit ever since that championship run a couple years ago where they made it to the Dome and lost to Pierre. But it's good to see the Bobcats turning things around.
Really, they were low on numbers. The classes just weren't as interested in football for the last 2 years, and now we see that coming up again, that there's some good young classes in Brookings, and Brady Clark really likes what Bergen Tetzloff brought to the field, not only on the offensive side, scoring the game-winning touchdown and the 2-point conversion, but also defensively. I think he was in on over 20 tackles in that game, and they've had multiple guys on that defensive side this year dominate. I mean, what have they given up this season?
7 points.
7
total.
points in 3 games?
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're getting it done on the defensive side, and that's a combination of good coaching and players who really want to go out and play with heart.
And then, oddly enough, the forgotten team, but we won't forget about them, is T. The loss to Spearfish knocked them to number 5, and then they got knocked out of the rankings completely. They're the most receiving votes, but they took care of business against Huron, 41-14. I like the fact that the Titans have turned it around. I think before the season, kind of a consensus 2 or 3 in 11AA. The Spearfish loss rattled them a little bit, but they've bounced back tremendously.
Yeah, and looking back, loss doesn't look as bad as it did at the time, especially knowing that they threw a couple interceptions in that game that they really could have swayed the game in if Brenner Conrad makes some better decisions there. And speaking of Brenner Conrad, he's looked a lot better as a dual-threat quarterback. Now in his second year as a starter, just a junior, he looks a lot more in control. So love what T-Area is doing right now, and I definitely think they're in the mix as well.
Absolutely. So games to watch this week. Mitchell is at Watertown. Harrisburg at Yankton, which we already mentioned, Spearfish at Aberdeen Central. The big one, Pier at Brookings. This is a Pier team looking to bounce back, but they have to go on the road against an improved Bobcat team.
Yeah, and back in, 2020 and 21, they had quite a rivalry for those 2 seasons, and Brookings got a couple wins against Pier during that span, or at least one, I know. But they couldn't beat them in the championship game back in 19 or in 20. So they still have a little bit on the line in games like this. So I'll be looking forward to seeing Pier, how they bounce back after a loss. And Brookings, they keep finding ways to win. Can they find a way to win against a top tier team like Pier?
As we said, the depth in AA this season, as we just illustrated, is better than it's ever been. It's amazing what one Pier loss can do for the outlook for the rest of the class.
Yeah, it really, people talk about this like when the Bulls were so good. You can't really judge the rest of the NBA because the Bulls were so good. Well, the same thing with Pier over the last 7 years. They've been so good. It's hard to judge how good the rest of the class has been. Now everybody's kind of in this big jumble. We still have time to figure things out, but to me, I really like what Watertown's doing. T's got to be right there.
Yep.
And then you still have got undefeated teams in Spearfish and Brookings that you got to talk about as well. And then the juggernauts, Pier, always hanging around as well.
Absolutely. Fun times in 11AA. And for Chad Berger's purposes, yes, I will move the wheel to 11AA. And now we will move on to 11A. We'll see if the wheel stays here. A bit unsteady.
It's constructed by Jandy
on this new
Incorporated.
tilt. So Chad, we got you. We're talking 11A now, excuse me. And we are finally going to see Sioux Falls Christian and Canton this weekend. But before that, going over last week, Canton over Vermilion 45-31. You went to the Sioux Falls Christian Lennox game, 19-8 Chargers over the Orioles. One of those things, Lennox got the first half, Sioux Falls Christian dominated the second half.
Definitely a tale of two halves. Lennox came out and just looked like a better team. They got momentum on some 3-and-outs. They didn't let Sioux Falls Christian really move it much past midfield in the first half. And then the Sioux Falls Christian defense showed up in a big way in the second half. They did not allow Boston Catcher to burn them. Tate Gertis was really slowed down in that second half. The defense was the real game changer here for Sioux Falls Christian once they started applying pressure. And then Braden Whitty, they just started running behind that big line. And then you finally saw that line wear down Lennox a little bit, but it still could have went either way down the stretch. But Sioux Falls Christian and Lennox, to me, did look like the two best teams in 11A. And Sioux Falls Christian looked like the best team in the second half for sure against Lennox.
And, by the way, the rest of the voters have finally come around to what we have been preaching this entire season, that Sioux Falls Christian's the number one team. They usurped Canton this week. 16 first-place votes, Canton with 8. So officially, Sioux Falls Christian number 1, Canton number 2 after a tie last week.
But Canton has had Sioux Falls Christian's number the last few times that they've played. And I think, I watched the Canton game against Vermilion as well, and it was so fun to see them air the ball out. They were able to throw the ball. It wasn't the Dakota Dome, which doesn't hurt, but T. Granum ran the ball well. Kane Wallner came up with some big catches and some big runs, big defensive plays like he always does. But I like that they put that on film where they're going to be able to throw the ball a little bit, and it's going to be a decent day out. Don't be surprised if Canton makes a few big plays through the passing game coming up on Friday night.
Absolutely. Seahawks still undefeated, obviously, still a legitimate threat. Our contention was just Sioux Falls Christian's resume was better, but now Canton and Sioux Falls Christian, they're going to lay it all out on the field on Friday night. I cannot wait for that game.
Yeah, that one's going to be really telling to me. There's been a ton of great matchups in 11A this year so far, but if Sioux Falls Christian goes to Lennox and gets it done and then takes on Canton the next week, they will solidify their spot, in my mind at least, as the top team in 11A.
Dakota Valley, Del Rapids at the bottom of the 11A rankings take care of business over Lakota Tech and Rapid City Christian, respectively. Tri-Valley receiving votes, they shut out Belfouche. West Central over 11B McCook Central Montrose, 55-7. We mentioned the 1-2 matchup. Del Rapids at Millbank is an interesting game. Tri-Valley Dakota Valley is a very interesting game.
I got my eyes on Tri-Valley Dakota Valley because Dakota Valley, came within a couple of last plays of finding a way to beat Canton. They've won a close game against Dells to start the season off, and then had the Lakota Tech game. So Tri-Valley, to me, when coming into the season, I thought they had enough athletes. They were young, but they had enough athletes to compete in 11A. This will be a huge test to see if maybe they belong in the rankings and Dakota Valley doesn't.
We will see on Friday, Dakota Valley and Tri-Valley. Moving to 11B now, and the other 1-2 matchup that we're going to do.
Whoa.
Winner, Elk Point Jefferson. Yeah, see the wheel? A little shaky,
Yeah,
but we got it going.
I have to calibrate it.
Recalibration on the to-do list for next week. Winner and EPJ. That was the 1-2 matchup. Winner gets the best of EPJ this time after the Huskies had gotten their number in the playoffs each of the past 2 seasons. 18-8 is your final. Elk Point scored late in the fourth quarter. This game was defined by the trenches, and Winner just dominated.
They were quick to the edges and better in the trenches. That's for sure. It really did look like Winner was even going to put more points than that on the board. They had a couple opportunities in the red zone where they didn't cash in. So a 10-point victory, not exactly your typical 10-point victory. It felt like more like a 3 or 4 score win for Winner. But that's not to say that Elk Point Jefferson can't be around later in the year. They just were out-quicked and beat up in the trenches, and that's something that it's really tough to do against Winner because that's their specialty.
Absolutely. Sioux Valley over Clark Willow Lake, 56-36. Woonsocket Wessington Springs Sanborn Central over Webster, 50-12. Mount Vernon Plankinton, they go into the top 5 off a loss to EPJ, back it up with a 36-6 win over Wagner, who was receiving votes. So Mount Vernon Plankinton cementing itself kind of at the bottom of this 11B poll. And it's not that they're unknown, but now they're kind of in that lurking stage right now.
I think it's good for them to be ranked even after that loss. And they're a legitimate team in 11B. They have the pieces to make a run because Wagner, that's a good win. If you can stop Gannon Knable enough to get a win, you deserve a little shout out.
Elk Point Jefferson this week is at Baltic. Sisseton is at Sioux Valley. Big game, number 4 versus number 1. Woonsocket Wessington Springs Sanborn Central goes to Winner, which should be a very interesting matchup between a couple undefeated squads.
Yeah, and Winner's still getting people back as we speak. Still won't be a full team, but Woonsocket Wessington Springs, a team that likes to throw the ball if they can. Ryder Mahalik has hauled in a lot of touchdowns this year. Holden Havlick is a great quarterback. One of the better offensive firepower teams that Winner's going to see this year. And Winner's not very susceptible to the big play, but if somehow Woonsocket Wessington Springs, Sanborn Central can get a few big plays in this game, I think they could keep it close because they're very tough on defense as well. But it's going to take some big plays for the Blackhawks to stay in this game.
Yeah, I don't think they're going to put up 50 against Winner as they did last week against Webster, but that's definitely the game to watch in 11B. And a reminder, as we move to the 9-man classes, ask Jandy anything. We are live on YouTube. You can comment, ask him anything about high school football, sports, life, probably not politics, but any other topic, Jandy will have you covered. All right, 9AA. And as we move down to the 9-man classes, we'll be frank, not really a lot of surprises in 9AA last week. All the top 5 teams, except for Hill City, won, and Hill City's was a shootout. And most of them are actually off this week in the top 5, but I think probably the one that caught my eye the most is probably the Parkston-Hanston game, just because they've had some great battles over the years. We kind of discussed it on last week's show. Hanston receiving votes in the poll, but a 34-9 victory for Parkston. Anything you gleaned from that game?
Yeah, I did. I think that this Parkston team, again, looking back to where I thought these teams were when they started the year, I think they're a little better than I thought, and I think they've gotten a ton of help from a solid line. We weren't sure how good their up front was going to be because that's where they lost most of their guys from last year. They've been better than I thought up front. They're able to play with some big teams up front, and Coulter Kramer has been outstanding week in, week out. He's been a leader, and he's come up with big plays when they've needed him. This game started out fairly close, and he pulled away with a couple big scores. He's kind of the lifeblood of that Parkson team. So I really like Parkson, even though I've told everybody I've been voting for Hamlin number 1 all season. Yeah. I really think that this Parkson team is better than I thought.
Hamlin dominates Great Plains Lutheran 59-8. Elkton Lake Benton with a 42-0 shutout over DeSmet. We mentioned the Harding County Bison Hill City shootout. Hill City falls out of the top 5. Still a good game for Hill City. I think they'll bounce back.
Yeah, they're gotta love the position that they're in right now. If you would have told them that at the beginning of the year, it is a tough loss to take, but they lost against a good team, and they still got Devin Bueller. He's done an awesome job this year.
Viborg Hurley, who was number 5, moves up to number 4 after the win over Alcester Hudson. And TDA ACDC sneaks into the top 5.
Yeah, another team to watch in 9AA. And you also mentioned Viborg Hurley. I think they had a little resurgence against Alcester Hudson, played their best game of the year as far as I'm concerned, and saw Brady Schroedermeyer throw the ball a little bit. I think that puts them in a different league when he's throwing the ball like that. So he kind of elevates them up a little bit too. There's some teams in 9AA, TDACDC, one of those teams. Loyola Frederick still undefeated, and they aren't getting any love yet, but they haven't played the schedule. But there's some teams in 9AA that are really interesting on that fringe.
Absolutely. You got Hill City receiving votes, Kimball White Lake receiving votes,
Yep.
Hanson still receiving votes. The 1, 4, and 5 teams are all off this week. Number 2, Hamlin plays a winless Florence Henry squad. So I guess kind of by default, the game of the week in 9AA is Great Plains Lutheran against Elkton Lake Benton, but we saw GPL kind of get blasted by Hamlin last week. So I don't think we're going to learn a lot in terms of the whole class in 9AA this week. But as you said, this is kind of the stretch. We're getting to that halfway point of the season where you're gearing up for that home stretch.
Yeah, I agree. This isn't going to be a huge telling week for 9AA, but a couple of games I have my eye on. Freeman, Marion, Freeman Academy. We keep talking about them as a team that has a chance to vault in, and they haven't quite gotten it done yet. They play a tough Alcester Hudson team this week. That, to me, will tell a little bit about both those two teams. And then I mentioned Loyola Frederick. They're still undefeated, but now they play Faulkton area. That's going to be their first big test. If they win that, okay, then we'll start taking notice of the Titans.
Yeah, a couple very interesting cross-class matchups with these 9AA schools. So we'll move on down to 9A. Didn't want to go too far down there. Again, kind of similar. A lot of expected results, I guess we would say. Howard over Chester in a shutout, 52-0. Wall beats a 9AA team in New Underwood, 59-6. The Warner Faulkton area, that was a cross-class 9A, 9B matchup, 28-20. That ended up being a very good game.
Yeah, a back-and-forth game with a lot of good athletes on both sides. Good win for Warner. I mean, this team keeps winning, and they're one of the only defending champions without a loss who people are kind of forgetting about, maybe? I don't know. Are they forgetting about them, or are they just
well, I was the one who voted them number 1 in the preseason.
You should keep them there, man. They need some more love, but they're doing the job. They did it against a tough team last week.
Wolsey Wessington, they were off last week. They stay at number 4, and we mentioned Harding County with their victory over Hill City. And then you mentioned Alcester Hudson, that being an interesting matchup this week as they're going to take on Freeman Marion Freeman Academy. We like the Alcester Hudson offense. It's just about consistency and getting some defense.
Yeah, that's been the issue for them for a couple of years now. They've got guys, Evan Brown and Lopez, who can run the football. I mean, legitimately run on anybody. But the speed on the outside, they give up some big plays. They get into some shootouts. That's what happened to them against Viborg Hurley. But they're a solid team with a lot of solid athletes.
And then Howard, we're going to talk about a little more when we get to 9B. Howard is at Canastota, which we've mentioned a couple of times here. That's just going to be a very intriguing cross-class matchup. Wall and Warner are both off this week. Wolsey Wessington's at Platte Geddes. Hardy County Bison, they're playing Lemon McIntosh. So, again, probably that Howard-Canastota game, probably the most interesting part from a 9A perspective.
Yeah, I think let's test Howard a little bit. Canastota has been a traditional great opponent of Howard in the last few years. This one looks maybe not as close on paper, but as we said, this Canastota team maybe will have a second chapter to their season starting this week with Blaze Showers at quarterback. We'll see how that goes. But Howard's a huge test, and they continue to do it every week. I look, and it's a different guy scoring a touchdown for him. Miller had a big week last week for Howard. They just have so many weapons. It's going to be really hard for the Hawks to contain the Tigers.
Let's move on down to 9B and finish things off. And we mentioned with the Canastota Howard game, but some other stuff. Newsflash, Avon's still pretty good. 54-20 over then number 5 Corsica Stickney. Isaiah Meyer with another huge game, both on the ground and on special teams. It's kind of a broken record, but with the way Avon is rolling, how do they keep their eyes on the prize, so to speak?
Yeah, that's the only issue, I think. But Coach Lucas does a great job of exactly that, keeping the pressure on, making sure they're hitting standards, not necessarily just getting wins. And they've done that. Mutter has done a great job running the ball. It's not just Meyer. Their defense has been suffocating, which that's been an issue a couple years ago. They've gotten much better on the defensive side of the ball. I just love that level that they're playing at. If you took all the 9-man teams right now, I think Avon's probably one of the top 2 teams, probably in all 9-man football.
Among all 9AA, 9A, 9B.
I think so. I really do. I think they're that good.
And I would tend to agree with you just based on the offensive output they're putting out right now, especially with Meyer and, as you mentioned, Mutter being a complement to him in the backfield. We mentioned the Faulkton area loss. They were number 2 in 9B. Losing to Warner in a 9A matchup, that's not a bad loss necessarily, so to speak. It's proving that Faulkton is still a legit number 2. And, if these results, hold, maybe they meet in the championship again. But Del Rapids St. Mary has something to say about that. Didn't get a shutout, gave up 6 points, so the season-long shutout is over. But a 16-6, a solid win over a frisky Coleman Egan team.
Again, Coleman Egan is one of these teams that had a really tough schedule to start their season. And how about the Cardinals defense? They do it again, giving up just 6 points. That is remarkable. We said that we'd lead the show with them if they threw another shutout. So we were this close.
We're this close.
From doing that. But they've got a tough matchup this week as well. Centerville is a team that can really put up points in bunches. I want to see if the Tornadoes can crack that really good St. Mary's defense. I'm really looking forward to that game.
Centerville, Del Rapids, St. Mary's on Friday. Sully Buttes, they move up to 3 with a win over Hitchcock-Tulare. They're at Potter County. Potter County also can be a team, as we've seen in the past, that can pull some upsets. Faulkton, they fall to number 4. They're at Leola Frederick. And then we mentioned Canastota getting into the top 5 with a victory at Garrettson, and they're going to face number 1 Howard in 9A. Avon, by the way, is at Cologne this week, the top team in 9B. So a lot of intriguing matchups in 9B. Aside from the Howard-Canastota game, which one intrigues you among the 9B schools?
For the 9B schools, I want to see, like I said, what St. Mary's does against Centerville. That one's really interesting. But Faulkton, they have a real test 2 weeks in a row now that they're going to play a school that's probably favored to beat them and has a chance to knock off a really good 9-man opponent as they take on Loyola Frederick. So that's a huge game if you're Faulkton area to get back on track with Charlie Dieter and some of those big boys up there.
All righty. Those are the 7 classes. Let's see what we got for Ask Jandy Anything. We got some good ones. We'll go with the first offering from Chad Berger. Oh, by the way, we got to move it to the Ask Jandy Anything part on the wheel.
Whoa.
Yeah. Will it stay? Either way, the question, best high school football stadium or field in South Dakota?
I'm kind of partial to Harrisburg, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a really nice stadium. I'm not gonna lie.
You gotta love the tunnel, and you gotta love, since they've added seats to the visitors side, how loud it can get in there, and the student section actually comes out and supports their team, unlike a lot of big schools. So gotta love that. I always love watching games in Watertown, just playing on the baseball field. That's awesome.
Yep.
I also think it's the best home field advantage for Harding County because they have decided to just not change their field in like 50 years. They just keep it ice cold. The gopher holes, wherever there's long grass, they don't care. They know where all those spots are.
It's a home field advantage.
They've got a home field advantage, man. Harding County. I still have not gotten out to a game, but I've heard stories of how cool that field is as well.
I will agree with you. You stole my letter. I was going to say Watertown. I just like the more love for Watertown.
This is the last year we could see it there. They're going to go play on the school campus next year.
Yeah, I just like the unique look, the baseball stadium look. It's a different thing. Just the old school bleacher stands. I love that in Watertown.
You know what else? Playing in Pier is awesome too. You get the Capitol right in the background. There's always a great support out there with the teams as well. And I've been to a lot of towns, but I haven't been to all of them. So if there's more that I'm missing, let me know.
All right.
The Gregory Gorilla. That's a great place to go to.
Yeah, seeing that gorilla right when you walk onto the field. I mean,
awesome.
Come on. That's nothing better than that. We got a bunch of questions. We'll give Matt Kearney some love. Most surprising team so far across, I believe, all of high school football.
All of high school football, most surprising team. I know there's a lot of surprising teams in my mind that have that I expected to do well, but they're doing even better. But the most surprising team, it's got to be Spearfish, right? The Spearfish Spartans.
Give some love to West River for Matt Kearney, of course. Spearfish.
It's not just because of Matt Kearney. Who knew they'd be undefeated, have a couple comeback wins, be able to beat T area in the first week of the season, and I see that they have the potential to keep this up. It's not like just a freak happenstance.
No, it's not a flash in the pan.
Even if they do lose somehow to Aberdeen Central, I still think they're the most surprising team because look at where they came from. I mean, what a turnaround for this team.
Absolutely. I guess I would go Watertown just because of the back-to-back wins over Yankton and Pierre. I think we both thought Watertown would be good. They might be the third or fourth best team in AA. And they're the clear number one right now. You beat the champs, you usurp them, and you go to the top. So let's see, more questions. We got a bunch of questions this week. Thank you all. Caleb Brozick, you got a bunch of questions. We will do the first one. Best concessions in the state.
You know, I never get concessions. I never do. Yeah. I'm always like doing halftime highlights at the time. But I will tell you, I went to Lenox last week, and the smell was unbelievable. I know they had burgers cooking right in the background. So those were, I mean, anytime you got burgers on a concession stand, that's got to be great. Speaking of burgers on the concession stand, Bridgewater, last time I went to Bridgewater for Bridgewater Emory Ethan game, they also had quite a setup there. But I don't know, you might have to add some for me.
I was going to say, I usually, you know, back when we were actually shooting games, usually didn't get a chance to eat. I will say, though, through basketball and through other things, apparently Brandon, I've had it a couple times. Brandon Valley usually makes some pretty mean popcorn. So
okay.
I'll say Brandon Valley for popcorn.
That.
We got more. How do you select your helmets? These beautiful helmets for display each week.
Yeah, that is a great question. Yep. So I have a nice collection of helmets, but not every single team. So I try to pick number one teams. So I got Watertown here. Yep. That's their old logo. I need to get an updated logo. Yep. So you got Harrisburg over here as a number one team. Winter over here is a number one team.
You got Del Rapids St. Mary's over there.
Del Rapids is at 2. And then I had Jefferson. I was going to do Jefferson Lincoln here, but again, I have an old Lincoln logo. So I decided to showcase Watertown. But here's the thing. I accept helmets from anybody across the state. Yeah. So please, seriously, let me know if you have a helmet that I can pick it up at a game or you can send it in, and we would be happy to feature your helmet.
To display.
I've been collecting them over the last few years. I haven't gotten very many new ones this year. I think Elkton is the only one that sent me one so far this year. So, yeah, keep them coming.
And then you got these fancy lights to light them up here in the center to make them look even better.
Fancy.
Let's see. We'll do a couple more. Here we'll do the obligatory one for Chad Burger: soft shell, hard shell, or burrito bowl.
Crispy all the way.
Tacos.
Yep.
I'm a burrito bowl person.
You're a burrito bowl. I mean, if I'm going to Chipotle or something, I'm definitely going to.
You can't mention a non-Taco John's restaurant.
Yeah, we're not getting.
Chad, I'm so sorry. I had nothing to do with that.
We're not getting paid for this. If I go to Chipotle, I'll have the bowl. But you're going to Taco John's for one reason, the crispy taco.
Yeah, well, you were covered nicely there.
Okay.
So, Chad, if you take Jandy out to lunch, make sure he knows what the deal is.
Next Tuesday.
Who's going to win 11 AA? That's the question from the missus.
Who is going to win? So if you put the odds on right now, I'm still going to say Pierre. Still going to say Pierre.
Yeah.
They're going to get better throughout the year. Caleb, I don't think it's broke. I think they can still continue to get better. Watertown just has too many flaws right now. Yankton, there's a little bit of distance between them. T area doesn't have that killer team. I don't know, but I would say Pierre right now.
Again, we highlighted how there are 7 teams in AA who've legitimately shown the ability to perform really well. And I said at the beginning, I don't think Pierre's loss means there's all of a sudden going to be a changing of the guard. I would say right now Watertown's the favorite, but they're going to have to go through Pierre in the playoffs. And so until they prove it then, I still think Pierre probably has the best chance, even though I do think Watertown's the favorite, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that totally makes sense, because if I'm playing Pierre right now, I've got confidence, but if I'm playing in the playoffs, it's like a whole different scenario. And that might be too much pressure for the Pierre players this year, because they don't have the same depth and talent that they've had in years past. But I love the coaching staff.
Absolutely. All right, last one. Caleb Brozick again, best student section in the state. We'll end on that.
Well, I got to go with the same stadium. I mean, you try to beat Harrisburg Tigers. Yeah. They will come out with the props in hand. They do the LeBron.
Yep, the powder toss.
Powder toss to start things off. They're always into it. The cheer team is huge. But again, I go to a lot of Sioux Falls area games, so maybe there's somebody else out there I need to take note of. But
yeah, I'll admit I've most of our travels the past couple of years have been to 11-man games. I will say though that the times I've been to Canastota, they got
Yeah.
some pretty good fans in Canastota. And so I'll give the 9-man school some love and say Canastota.
I love going to 9-man games. It's just a different vibe too. Like the entire community is invested and into it. So student sections, though, this is about student sections, and usually there's not huge student sections at 9-man games, but that's why Harrisburg comes first to mind.
All right, we got a late one. We should probably answer it. Ryan Deal, best 11-man team and the best 9-man team ever in South Dakota State history. I will say for 11-man, I might go with the Jefferson team from 2 years ago. That was just a juggernaut.
I think the 17 Washington Warriors would be awfully tough.
Actually, yeah. To be fair, those were the three.
Benson,
2 or 3 Pete. Yeah.
Farniak, Brock Walker, Tupac, Jaden Johansson, Zach Hines, who's in the NFL right now. Pretty good team.
Yeah, I had recency bias. I should have actually thought about the
No,
question first.
I mean, honestly, if you look at the average score, Jefferson was more dominant than that Washington team.
Yeah.
But you just look at all the talent that was on that team. That's the first one that comes to mind. And then 9-man, I keep going back to the DeSmet team. I want to say 04.
So yeah, 20 plus years ago.
Blake Hoyer's team that pretty much threw a shutout for the season. I think they did give up one score, maybe 3 points on the year. But that, to me, since I've started following, which is like 99, 2000, that was probably the first season I kind of started following this. That one really sticks out as one of the best. Although I will say the Chase Mason Viber Hurley team with Angel Johnson in 19.
Yeah.
They weren't as dominant either, but you just look at the talent on the field on that team, and they had some studs on defense as well. They kind of sneak into my mind too.
All right, there we go. Thank you, everyone, for the questions. Lots of great questions for Ask Jandy Anything this week. Final thoughts, sir?
Final thoughts is another great week. I'm really looking forward to Lincoln and Jefferson. The first time we've had one of these top teams in 11 AAA actually play against each other. And then the Canton Sioux Falls Christian game also, it looks like a real dandy. We'll have it all for you next week, break it down the best we can, and look forward to another great slate of games.
Absolutely. Thanks to our producers, Bruce Andera and Hannah Rowe. I'm going to get that correct this week. Hannah Rowe. Thank you again for Jason Andera. I'm David Brown. This has been episode 5 of Inside the 605. See ya.